everyone, a very good evening. You're watching The Money Show on this rainy evening on ET Now. I'm Mubina Kapasi, and this is the show where we get you all the important tips, pointers, news that you need to take note of when it comes to your personal finances. Here's what we'll be discussing today on the show. First up, emergency funds. If not during the COVID crisis, if not during this lockdown, if not during this cash crunch that a lot of us are facing, then when? Now is the time when you actually break into that piggy bank, the money that you've been keeping away for a rainy day, and use it, because that's exactly what an emergency fund is for. However, there are various individuals who A, have either not kept an emergency fund, or B, because we are now into the second month of the lockdown, or in fact even more, the emergency fund now is slowly depleting. So what should such individuals do? That's what we'll be talking about first up. And in the later part of the show, we'll be talking about the various reforms in health insurance, right from more inclusions in your policy to even telemedicine now being covered by your insurance policy. So it's an action-packed day on The Money Show, and without any further ado, let me introduce Hemant Rustagi to take us through the very first topic. Mr. Rustagi, thanks so much for joining us today on The Money Show. I hope you and your family are doing well amidst this entire COVID pandemic, staying home, staying safe. So let's talk about the importance of this emergency fund. I suppose it's a little late to go about and say how you should be investing your emergency fund, or you know, why you should keep an emergency fund, because people have literally gone through the difficulties of not having an emergency fund. So let's get through this point. What should individuals who are seeing a cash crunch because of cuts in their salary, or they're freelancers, so incomes have gone down to close to zero, they need cash, they don't have an emergency fund, what are the options then before them?
Well, I think, Mubina, you're absolutely right. Creating an emergency fund is very, very important, because it plays a very significant role, in fact, in handling situation where inflow of our income gets impacted. I mean, what we have seen in this COVID-19 situation is that people have lost their job, people are not getting the kind of salary they were getting earlier, the future looks a little uncertain. So I think in a situation like this, it's very, very important to have an emergency fund, because what it does for you is that it allows you to kind of go about your life, at least a financial life, without having any adverse impact. Because if you have kept money aside for emergency fund, which ideally we always recommend should be equal to 3 to 6 months, and preferably 6 months. So you know that even if you are facing a situation where you are not going to get your money, or not as much as you were getting earlier, you can still go about paying your EMIs, you can still go about covering your expenses. So I think it's very, very important to have an emergency fund. But it's quite possible that even if you have created one, that you may be actually reaching a situation, like you rightly said, we're almost in the third month of the lockdown, where it's getting depleted now. If you kind of created an emergency fund for 3 months and it's almost getting depleted, or there are those who have not even created one. So I think the situation have to be handled differently. Let's talk about someone who has not created emergency fund. Now there can be two situations here. One, we are talking about someone whose income has not been impacted in this COVID-19 situation. The regular income is coming in, there is no threat to the job. Everyone has realized the importance of emergency fund in this situation now. So I think it's important that you begin the process of creating one right away. 2-3 things you need to remember. One, as I said, it should be large enough to cover your 6 months expenses, and that includes even EMIs and whatever you had to pay. So that's one. Second is, invest in options where it can be liquidated easily. You don't want it to be impacted by the vagaries of the market. So you could keep this money in your saving bank account, or in FD, or in a sweeping account where the money comes out of FD as and when you require it, or even the liquid funds or mutual funds. So have a quantum which covers your 6 months expenses. Second, keep it in the option which is liquid, can be taken out without having to worry about the vagaries of the market. How do you go about it? Well, it depends again in your personal situation. If you're not in a position to use the lump sum today, start putting money aside every month. Or if going forward, let's say a couple of months down the line, if there is a windfall or some kind of lump sum money that you get, keep that aside. I think the priority has to be right now emergency fund. Of course, I'm not saying that do it at the cost of ignoring your short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. But if you have not created an emergency fund, I think this has to be the top priority.
Okay, understood. Just to sort of clarify it again, Mr. Rustagi, first up, when you need cash, you would tend to look back into your lockers, you would tend to look back into your bank accounts and see how much money is accumulated over there. Obviously, everybody has a certain set of financial assets wherein the money is sort of stored. So if it comes down to that, and now, of course, the government has as well allowed access to the Provident Fund. This is something that the Finance Ministry had allowed, I think, just a couple of months ago. Then there's gold as well. So if we have to talk about order of liquidation of assets, if you could call it that, how would you advise viewers go about that?
Look, Mubina, this situation can be quite tricky. In fact, I would say, there are a few do's and don'ts that one has to really follow. So let me begin with what one should not be doing in a situation like this. See, as you rightly mentioned, when you have a cash crunch, you kind of look around and see from where you can get your money, whether you have kept money aside somewhere or you're investing for some short-term or medium-term goal, can you take out that money? But I think the first priority has to be ensuring that you don't do certain things. For example, what is that you shouldn't be doing? There is a tendency at times that when you have a cash crunch to use credit card recklessly. That is something that has to be avoided because many a times it is seen as access to easy money. And the general feeling is that, okay, I'll pay it for 5 to 10% and then keep on rolling this. What we need to realize is that it's a very, very costly loan that you take. You're paying almost 36 to 48%. And if you're not in a position to pay it subsequently or later on, I think that can be a short recipe of financial disaster. So focus on first what you should not be doing. Then let's talk about what you should be doing. Yes, if you can look around and see some money which is lying, or maybe you kept that money aside for some short-term goal. Let's say somebody was planning to buy a car or maybe travel somewhere, then that cannot be the priority right now. The priority right now is to take care of regular expenses. Make sure, like I mentioned earlier, that your financial life is not impacted at the moment. So use that money. So that you can cover your expenses. The third is that, again, if you don't even have that, then if you kept money aside for, let's say, your long-term goal like retirement, which may be 10, 15, 20 years away, that is something that you can put a stop to that for some time and start using that money, or maybe take out some money from there. But considering the kind of fall that we have seen in the equity market, the first priority has to be maybe not to touch equity investment, because obviously when you're exiting from equity today, you're exiting almost 20-25% lower than where the markets were. Avoid doing that. If you have some money in fixed deposit, if you have some money in debt, or even hybrid funds, especially those where equity component is very, very low. The reason why I'm saying take out from there is because they wouldn't have been impacted by what is happening in the market today. So look at those options where you can minimize the losses, minimize the negative impact of taking this out money suddenly. Avoid taking out money from equity as far as possible. Of course, if there is no other option, then maybe you can look at that. But the order should be look at safer investment, look at investment that have not been impacted. And then if that is sufficient enough, you don't have to touch your equity portfolio.
Okay. Now, Mr. Rustagi, there are also perhaps a section of individuals who have learned the lesson the hard way but do not want to encounter this situation again, and hence they make a resolution that from now on I am going to ensure that I keep aside some money for a rainy day. So you mentioned 6 months, roughly 4 to 6 months of your monthly expenses at least should be kept aside in an emergency fund. So help us over there, Mr. Rustagi. How do you assess what your monthly expense is? Because for me, my monthly expense could also be, of course not anymore, but a trip to the movies.
See, absolutely. I think one important thing we need to do also is, kind of relook at your expenses today, because there will definitely be expenses that could even be curtailed or maybe avoided altogether. So do some kind of budgeting. See, there are two things important here. One is that in a situation like this, you can't increase your income. Okay, you have no control over that. So what is the next best thing that you can do? You can cut down your expenses. Weed out those expenses which are not necessary right now. So you can reduce the gap between what you are getting or what you are spending today, at least reduce that. So that's the first thing that that we need to do, because if you're able to at least reduce your expenses, then you will get a fair idea. So that's one part. The second part is that if you have taken a loan, of course, there is an option of taking moratorium. You also mentioned about taking money out of Provident Fund. But I think taking money out of Provident Fund should be the last option, according to me, because that's something that you kept aside for your retirement. But of course, if there is no other option, rather than worrying about where are you going to get this money from, you can certainly look at this option. You can certainly look at opting for moratorium. But again, understand there is a cost involved in that. If there are ways and means within your own portfolio through which you can do that, or you can bring in some discipline, reduce your expenses, I think that should be the priority. So ensure that it covers your expenses. Second is, if you have EMI to be paid or any other expenses to be paid on a regular basis, all those expenses should be covered. So like I mentioned before, it should cover all your monthly commitment, not only looking at only household expenses, because in that case, you may actually have a huge shortfall. So cover all the expenses, cover all the commitment that you have, and start building it step by step. Having realized that what is the importance of emergency fund, like I mentioned before, this has to be the top priority, and it can be done in a phased manner. If you can kind of get some lump sum money, utilize for that. Right now, I think the priority should be to create an emergency fund, and you can put it on hold, maybe put on hold some other goals which may not be actually as important as creating an emergency fund today.